more legitimate review of the Honda CRF300L. Through scouring the interwebs, we have found that nobody's really put the 300L to its paces to see its full potential. And so that's what we're here to provide today.
So we got here probably one of your hardest hitting 300L owners. Things taking a beating, to say the least. But we'll get farther into those stories down the road. So we have, what year is that, Berkeley?
This is a 2021, first year they came out with it.
And this is?
A 2022.
So this is our buddy, Lennox.
I gotta confirm that.
Very low hours and mileage.
I think it's
and this thing has been beat to piss. So we have quite a good comparison between a fresh running machine and something that's been through the paces.
Yeah, so his is a 2022 with about 15 or 1600 miles on it, and this is a 21, and I think we just clicked over 13,000. So clickbait title might be like a long-term review, but truthfully, I would say that this is a mid-term review for it, or maybe even like a quarter-term review for it.
Well, with how many hours and miles you put on it and what it's been through, it might be a long-term review for this bike compared to what other owners might be seeing on their daily drive to and from work. Very low stress hours.
And so with that, if anybody else has a 300L and they've high marked this 300L as far as miles or abuse, please be sure to let us know in the comments. The expectation is to bring this up to 50,000 miles without any sort of major problematic issues, and it's been absolutely flawless so far. And I don't know, we can start getting into some talking points, I suppose.
Excellent.
So the first one being why I ordered the CRF300L. There's a handful of reasons for that, and number one being it's a cheap, very economical way to have a ton of entertainment.
For cheap, what price range are we looking at?
But I forget what they're going for right now. We could probably look
anywhere between $5,350 to about $6,000 with ABS and other packages.
Yeah. And then you have your shipping fee of whatever, $400 and
freight costs, setup costs.
I'd say tax, title. Look at if you budgeted $6,500 out the door, you'd probably be fine. Which is with respect to a motorcycle with this, the capabilities that this presents is an insane price.
Don't forget your OHV sticker. Anywhere between $10 and $20, depending on the state.
Yeah. So. Let's see, we kind of riffed on a couple of points there. The reliability one, I guess we can sort of dive into that right out of the gate. So we have 13,000 miles on it. What issues have we seen? What issues do we anticipate? There's obviously the standard wear items, tires, chain sprockets I changed at 12,000 miles. Still on the original brake pads. We busted up the bars. That is one weak point of the $300 that the bars are very soft. Crushed the display, riding some single track, crushed it on a rock, no big deal. And that's pretty much it. I prematurely put a cam chain tensioner in it.
Why was that?
So we all know the infamous 5K rattle of the 300L. Every single 300, they have this engine in so many bikes. They all have the infamous rattle. And it seems catastrophic, but I assure you it's fine. That's just what they do.
Interesting.
I'd like to learn a little bit more about it. So you can get a manual cam chain tensioner and override that, but my worry there is that obviously Honda is aware that these have a cam chain rattling issue.
Yep.
And they could, put a stiffer spring in it and override that, but maybe it puts excessive tension on the chain, and then you're prematurely aware of it.
And when you're looking at Honda too, I always think high reliability.
I
assume they engineered that in. Yeah, so maybe don't fix something that's not broken.
Yeah, right.
The noise might be worth it in the long run.
Yeah. So so those have been the items that, I had a fork seal that had a little bit of dirt under it. I just took a seal saver and saved that. Tires, you get about, so I run the Dunlop D605, and we get about 3,000 miles out of a tire.
Do you know what came stock on them?
So it's an IRC Model XXYY. Not a bad tire. A lot of people bitch about them, but I think it's a fine tire. It's a good dual sport tire.
Depends what you're doing, how crazy you're getting.
Yeah.
It's a fine beginner tire, intermediate tire.
And beginner, that term being taken lightly. Obviously we have the other bikes here. This is the best part about this bike is that even for somebody who has experience riding motorcycles, does a lot of riding, is used to higher horsepower or more capability, this is a phenomenal machine.
Absolutely. These things can go anywhere. You see the motocross bikes, the woods bikes. They can do everything, but they can't sit on a highway at 65 miles an hour for 4 hours without blowing.
Yeah.
These can do that, plus everything these can do. It's a little heavier, a little slower, but zero limitations on where they can and can't go.
So I think that's a good point, so of these 13,000 miles, how have they been divvied up? What of those miles have been on trails, on freeway, on single track, on enduro courses and stuff like that. So I'd say the bulk of it, I would say the saddle time, the amount of time that your ass is on the seat is 50-50 of highway time and off-road time. But as far as the miles go, because you're going so much faster, a lot more of the miles themselves have been on the freeway. And so with that, what's it capable of cruising? I will hold this thing at 72 to 73 miles an hour for, tank on tank on tank. I think the longest one I've done is 6 hours down the interstate. Just pull over, fill up with gas, and then just right back to 72 miles an hour. So how much
do you weigh then? Just so they know.
I'm 155 pounds, and we're getting about 60 to 65 miles to the gallon at those speeds.
I see.
Of course, as you slow down, you get more.
And what are you topping out at? Maybe flat ground and downhill?
So yeah, the top speed is an interesting question because it doesn't make much horsepower at all, and so that is the every little bit. If you have a headwind, it'll slow you down. If your chain is a little bit stiff, it'll slow you down significantly because it robs such a high percentage of the total available power. And so top speed, if it's a calm day on flat ground, is about 80-82 miles an hour. If you have a really aggressive headwind, it'll knock it all the way down to 72 miles an hour. There's definitely been days where I've just been wide open for a couple hours, only going 72 miles an hour.
Yeah.
But the fastest that it has ever gone, the fastest, and Alex can back me up on this one, was downhill, drafting a car, absolutely pinned, 96. Wow. Granted, that was display speed. I don't know the actual speed, but it displayed that I was going 96 miles an hour.
At 96 miles an hour, how balanced are your wheels and rims?
So that's a good point. So we have this is our buddy Leonard's bike, and I noticed myself as well when I first got on the bike. If I was cruising 70 miles an hour, it would just have a slight oscillation. And it's a little bit unnerving.
Yep.
But I think it's more so rider induced than it is the bike. And I'm also curious if the tires have anything to do with it. If just the tire doesn't go quite as well with the freeway. But so when I was brand new on it, it would get a little bit of an oscillation. But after you get comfortable and lighten up on the handlebars, you don't have any input. You get used to the micro inputs. It was perfectly stable at 96 miles an hour.
Oh, that's impressive. I know we've had other bikes, KTMs and whatnot on the highway. Yeah. They shake like crazy, unless you have a perfectly balanced rim and tire.
Right.
When you're passionate off rocks, I can't imagine they stay true for long. So hence the tire balancer. It gets gnarly.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's testament to that. So enduro, I raced an enduro, a 70-mile enduro race with it. Took it like a champ. Pretty much just stuck it in second gear and just worked the clutch non-stop. It was very abusive.
How long was that race?
70 miles. How long did it take me? I don't know. It was it had to have been 6 or 7 hours.
All single track?
It was all single track.
That'll beat you up, especially with the weight. These are a little bit heavier than your standard dirt bike. Let's say a 250 SX or 250F off-road SX bike, probably 200 to 225 pounds. What are we looking at with these? 308 or
310, I think.
Okay.
About 310, probably a little heavier with all the fluids. I don't know how they weigh them out, but yeah, it's definitely a pig in the woods. And with respect to a motorbike, but
for the height of them and how well you can touch on these, it's not terrible. They're completely maneuverable, and I wouldn't say it's the end of the world the extra weight.
Yeah, and if I'm going out and I just know that I'm riding trails, no crazy single track. If it's just going to be soft, sweeping single track and trail riding, I'll take the 300L over the KTM all day. Just because it's so much more reliable. You don't feel bad putting on the miles on the KTM.
That's fair. And if you are on the edge about purchasing one of these, knowing what they've been through, I think it's safe to say the limitations are minimal on what these can and can't do. If you're on the verge, go and buy one. They're great bikes.
Yeah, it's definitely, the limitation is going to be the rider. It's
absolutely.
And a big point, the reason that I like to take it so many places is that generally speaking, it's more fun to ride something slow fast than it is to ride something fast slow. You know, it's a lot more fun to just ring something out and put it to its complete potential. You know, not all the time. You know, like this thing will whoop my ass, but it's still a ton of fun. But
it's like you're teaching your girlfriend how to ride her new KLX 140. You would rather be putzing along with her on one of these than on your 300 two-stroke, trying to keep it in first gear, going 100 feet, stopping every 10 minutes.
Right.
They are their own category, but they've blown us out of the water for the price range they're at.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's capable of everything. You know, I've done some pretty gnarly enduro climbing rocks and stuff, rock gardens, and handles it all fine. So that sort of leads to the next point, though, is that a lot of people will complain about the soft suspension, which it is soft, and then they'll complain that it's not adjustable, and rightfully so. You know, it is not adjustable. The swing arm or the subframe is welded on, so a lot of people kind of nitpick at those things. But when you look at what the bike is and what it sells for, you know, it's like, all right, so the Kawasaki has adjustable suspension, but it costs $200 extra. Well, that's not the market they're going. You know, what is the minimum bike required to do all of these things?
Yep.
You know, what is the absolute minimum we can do, because that's gonna, you know, cost you the least.
So after riding a bike with motocross suspension or nicer suspension, would you say it's worth an extra $200 to get nicer suspension if Honda ever came out with a model that offered that?
I would say, you know, personally, I would like that, but I absolutely understand cheaping up, because every little bit counts, you know. Right. So every quarter that you take off of the bike, it's getting it more towards their goal. To the average person who might be buying the 300L,
right,
might not matter at all.
See, that makes sense to me, but for an owner or as a customer, once you have these forks, you're never gonna be able to get an adjustable fork for $200 after.
Right, that's true.
You're gonna pay a couple $1,000 for a new set of forks or rear shock.
Right.
Whereas if it came off the showroom for an extra $200, those costs offset pretty quickly, especially if you're a beginner and you're going into it. But I guess if you're on the edge between this and a KLX, I don't know if I would let the non-adjustable suspension sway you one way or another.
No, I certainly wouldn't. But it is definitely a point to bring up. And so that's the funny part, is that it's like, so I say to the general audience that this bike is catered towards, but you look at it from the perspective of, like, you know, I consider myself a relatively experienced rider, and I don't see why more people who you know have experience aren't buying them, just for the absolute fun factor, the cheap factor, the practicality. It's absolutely, you know, experienced riders. Like, I don't consider it a non-experienced rider's bike. Like, if you're experienced and you're thinking, well, I should go for the 450. Well, the 450 has 400-mile oil change intervals. This has 8,000-mile oil change intervals.
Yeah, I guess that's what you're trying to get out of it, right? If you're trying to slap a set of some Supermoto tires on it, Supermoto rims, and you're trying to go to the track and race your buddies, okay, 400 or 450L is where it's at.
Right.
If you're trying to commute, just be comfortable, save maybe a couple dollars on gas mileage, save money on oil changes, basically buy it and forget about it until something breaks.
Yeah.
This is the bike. You're going to the campground, you want to tool around. You got a cabin or a farm, you want to tool around.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better bike.
Yeah.
Or if you race or something and you want to go have some stress-free miles out in the woods, you won't have to maintain this.
And that's the big thing, you know. Instead of beating up your more expensive bikes, you can just buy this for half the price, not have to do anything to it, and then just rack up the miles and still get the time out, you know, get the time and the enjoyment of going out in the woods. And
absolutely. And the price of replacement parts and everything. You buy this once, you're going to have this for 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
The rest of your life.
It's like the XRs, you know. Look at the early 80s XRs that are still out kicking it.
The engine's been great on these. It's a street bike engine crammed into a dirt bike chassis.
And that is, but the power that it delivers is a pitfall. It does wheelies, so you can clutch up a wheelie in second gear fine.
Okay.
But the big thing that I would like to do more of that I'm not able to do is when you're riding in like gravel fire roads and stuff, and you're going around a corner and you want to just kick out the back end to get sort of comfortable on it.
Yep.
And it just can't. It just doesn't quite have the horsepower to get it spinning. So then what happens is you get a sandy spot and it'll wash out a little bit, and then it'll go back onto the gravel, and it just gets kind of, and the soft suspension is a bit unstable. So it can get a little bit wild, but that's all part of the fun.
Interesting. Have you noticed any issues with the slightly less clearance compared to a motocross bike in the woods?
That is true. Ground clearance is another pitfall. So if we're riding single track and it's deep rutted out, you're bashing the foot pegs. You're paying attention to where they're at because you're you're bound to hit some rocks with it. And you can see, camera's a little ways away, but I've bashed so many rocks that the weld around the foot peg is starting, it peeled away a little bit. I'm not too worried about it. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something to be aware of.
And I would assume most people that are buying these aren't hopping over logs, crashing rocks at the speeds that you probably are, and then the size of rocks that we're probably looking at. But if you're cruising down fire lines or anything, you're never going to have to worry about that clearance. If you're a short rider, that is a huge plus for this bike, right? Depending on how you're taking it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're newer, younger rider, shorter. You could flat foot this easily. The sag on it, not adjustable, but you can hop on this thing. Well, the sag is adjustable, but very soft, very easy to flat foot compared to other motorcycles on the market.
And it's pretty fun on trails when you're going over like the whoopie bumps, and it's just
it's like a trampoline almost.
Yeah, it's kind of a good time.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right, we're probably gonna have to pause there so I can look at what else we need to talk about.
I'll just let it go.
All right. You want to talk about the tech side of it?
Battery might have to get switched in about 5 to 10 minutes.
Well, here, pause it for a second. And get something else to drink. What? Like. All right. Sorry about that. We're back. We had to refill our drinks real quick. Get real thirsty out in the garage. It's pretty warm, 85 degrees or so. But we want to just touch on a couple more things. We want to touch about maybe some of the tech behind this, the speedometer, how those headlights are working at night. And then we want to touch about maybe ergonomics real quick, and then what is your unicorn like?
Yeah.
But let's start off with some of the tech. What are we seeing on that display?
And so that's sort of the beauty of the 300L is that, tech, I guess, is sort of a relative question when it comes to a motocross bike or a dirt bike or something that's meant to be off-road. It's like, what is tech? And so fortunately for the 300L, I would say the tech is limited, which is critical for something that, we use it for very insane explorations. For example, last summer, so we have our buddy Leonard who got one, and we also have our buddy Taylor who ordered one last year as well. And we were in the UP, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Yep.
And just finding trails to explore on. And we found one, and it started off. It was a pretty casual trail. It was pretty fun, and it was a little bit grassy, which was confusing because it was supposed to be like an open ATV route. And usually those are pretty gravelly and beat up. And so we're exploring, and there's a little bit of mud, and it's like, oh, not bad. I don't mind cruising through a little bit of mud.
Right.
And then there was more mud and progressively more mud. Until it got to the point where it's like, well, are we gonna, it must be another mile and then we'll be out of the mud. And it ended up being, after we got into the thick of the mud, it was 4 to 5 hours straight.
Oh, jeez.
Of just mud. And I'm not talking like, it was we were in 6 inches to a foot, variable of just mud.
Jeez. How did the bike take that? Was it just hotter than you could imagine?
And it was fine. The fan kicks on. Unfortunately, it does have a radiator fan, so the fan kicks on, and the bike took it way better than we did. We were just, especially Taylor, he was just tipping over. There's huge flies just buzzing into your helmet. Just a miserable time. But yeah, the bikes handle it well. Yeah, but it's like something like that where you don't, you want something that's very simple. You just want it to work,
Right.
And that's the beauty of the bike is that you can get out into those weird spots. It'll get you out, you don't have to worry about it. So,
okay.
As far as like the display, it's pretty simple. You can, do your time on there if you're doing enduros. If you think you're going to be beating the clock, make sure you wait at the line before it. But otherwise, it has your speed, your time, gear indicator, RPM, and you can toggle between it. Like it has a lot of people don't know that it has a flashing white light, which is super annoying when you're cruising 80 miles an hour down the freeway for 4 hours and it's just a steady white light or a flashing white light. You can actually change the RPM that light blinks on it.
That's your shift indicator?
Yeah, your shift indicator.
Okay.
Yep. So what I tend to do instead of using the fuel indicator is I will reset my trip meter every time, and then and that also resets your fuel consumption, and so that there's just shy of 2 gallons of fuel in the tank that you can trust. And so every time I get up to 1.5 gallons of used fuel, I'll start looking for a fuel station and fuel up and then reset that. And that way each time I know exactly how much fuel I use as opposed to
I see. And what are you getting for gas mileage? About 60, 70 miles per
Yeah.
gallon?
So we touched on this earlier, and it depends. It's, if what I found is that if I'm going 70, I get 60 miles to the gallon. If I'm going 60 miles an hour, I get 70 miles to the gallon.
Okay.
68, thereabouts, is pretty standard. So just
that's
assume
great for a
65. Yeah.
Excellent.
And then next, ergos.
Ergos, yeah. So maybe tell us about we touch on your weight, maybe your height, and then just tell us how comfortable that bike is.
Yeah, so I'm about 155 pounds, about 6 feet tall, and very standard as far as standard build size as far as like a typical dirt bike rider goes. And so the ergos are a lot more road bike oriented than I anticipated.
It's like if a dirt bike was a Goldwing.
Yeah, it's a pretty good analogy. It's a dirt bike's Goldwing, and so the seat kind of settles you in a little further, and the gas tank sits a little higher. And so when I first got it, I expected a nice flat plank seat that you could get up on the gas tank on.
Yep.
And it certainly is not that. It's a lot more road bearing than that. And the foot pegs sit quite a bit lower. And then as far as like suspension goes, obviously it's soft. So for a 155 pound guy, if you're getting air at all, you can expect to bottom out your shocks.
Only when you're getting air, when you're hitting hard stuff in the trail.
Yeah, and if you're moving pretty quick, you're gonna bottom out your forks very easily. You get a passenger on the back, it's gonna look a little goofy just because it's hanging so low. But it's very comfortable. We've had a lot of smaller guys hop on it, and it's still just as comfortable.
Yep.
Handlebar height, I did find that the factory bars are a little bit low, but luckily, as soon as you tip it over one time, you're gonna have to replace them. So you're gonna, you can get the rise that you want. So my bars are a little bit higher. I would like to do something with the suspension, but the thing about this bike that I'm keeping it in stock form just to see the absolute lifespan of everything. I want to see how long the engine will take me, without doing anything to it besides routine maintenance, air filters, oil changes, things like that. So, maybe, if the engine explodes on it, then maybe I'll do like a performance build or something like that. If the suspension, if the seals completely fail, then maybe I'll rebuild them and put stiffer springs in there.
Since you did lose some oil, because your forks were leaking oil, did you ever replace that? You've just been running it?
I've been running it without a few tablespoons of oil in there. It's super easy to fill it back up. We could just pop these handlebars off. The thing is that there's not a good way to know how much is in there without draining it all out and then refilling the exact amount that you need.
Right. I think that's pretty standard for any rebuild.
Right. And so I'm kind of hesitant because I don't want it to, hydro lock on me from too much oil or something. So, and it's been fine. It's I'm not too picky about how my bike handles. So it's been great with that.
When you do have two people on there, is it pretty cramped, or is there enough space if you and your girlfriend want to go for a ride?
It's more space than like an R6 or an absolute street bike.
She's not sitting over you and whacking your helmet.
So it's if you're just bopping around, it's if you're cruising around town, going to the beach or something, it's a ton of fun.
Yeah.
But you're not going to be doing it cross country. Well, you might if you're.
Well, how crazy?
Let us know if you do.
Yeah. Comment down below how far the two of you have ridden cross country on one of these.
It'd be fun to find somebody that had a Goldwing and they're doing like an iron butt, and then you just do it with your girlfriend on the back on a 300L.
Oh, that'd be sweet. Hopefully they're filming that if they're doing it.
Yeah, build some sort of sissy bar or something for it.
Huh.
But yeah. What do we have next?
I guess. And you need to save some weight, get the higher hill climb. Try our lightweight Rook risers from Rook Racing. All right, I think we're back. Berkeley, last question I think I want to ask you before we wrap this all up is, what would be your unicorn bike, or what would be the greatest bike that you could ever have?
That's a good question, and I think aside from the Tenere 700,
one of the greatest motorcycles ever produced.
Yeah,
it's hard to argue that.
That's a cool motorcycle. So aside from that, I think it would be the 300L. It's as far as if you could only have one motorcycle, so I'm not saying it's my. Well, I might say that it's my favorite motorcycle ever because of how inclusive it is of all.
But if you could only have one, I guess this ticks all those boxes.
Yeah, if I could only have one bike, it would be the 300L. That would be it. And it's like a lot of people might be like, well, why wouldn't you take the 450L? And it's like, well, the 450, the one of the most important elements of a motorcycle for me is the reliability. I just want a super reliable bike. And the 450L having 400-mile oil change intervals just doesn't quite cut that.
That makes
You know?
sense.
And the 450, you're going to have to change a piston before you have to change the oil on this.
That makes sense. You're almost comparing R6 to a Goldwing at the end of the day.
Right.
You still got the Goldwing of dual sports.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's basically the Goldwing status.
Reliable, bulletproof.
Yeah.
It's going to go a million miles.
Yeah, and so and that leads to sort of the next question of like, well, what would I do? You know, if I could make my dream bike, what would that dream bike be?
Yeah.
And it would be very similar to the 300L, except with a little bit more horsepower and better suspension. And I would take the financial penalty that would be associated with those things.
Yep.
I would understand that we'd be looking at like maybe a $9,000 to $10,000 dirt bike for something that can maintain the reliability, but have the horsepower to be able to throw the front wheel up in third gear when you're cruising through a trail,
Yep.
To be able to kick out the back end, and to cruise comfortably. I'd like to be able to cruise comfortably at 90 miles an hour.
I see.
Which it would do as far as the stability goes, as far as my experiences, but the horsepower output just isn't quite there.
Would you change anything to the chassis? Same seat height?
That's a good question. For me personally, I'd probably make it a little bit flatter of a seat, a little bit more off-road friendly of a seat, because I have no problem sitting on a seat like that for extended periods of time. And if I do, I'll just get like a Corbin seat. If I know I'm going on a log adventure, I just put on a softer seat or a more adventure-friendly seat, and then sort of maintain the original intent behind the motorcycle. And so suspension. Maybe have a bolt-on subframe. I know a lot of people complain about that. So it'd be sort of an overall. I would accept the minor quality improvements that would be associated with the more expensive bike. But that's what makes the 300L is that they pull those away and give it that beautiful price tag. So
that's true. The perfect bike for $5,000 to $6,000.
Exactly. So yeah, my dream bike would basically be this bike with more horsepower and better suspension.
Excellent. Well, I think we've kind of beaten all the topics on the 300Ls.
Yeah.
Any wrap up you would like to give on these almost perfect motorcycles?
Yeah, right. So I think to conclude, the points that we're trying to make is that it's sort of a beginner-oriented bike.
Marketed towards a beginner?
It's marketed towards a beginner, but absolutely everybody can have a great time on them. It's not a beginner-exclusive motorcycle.
Yeah, I think it's easy to sell to beginners with the price range, the seat height. Maybe a slight lack of power makes it easy for a beginner to ride. But I don't think that's any reason to scare it away from intermediate or professional motorcycle rider that wants a great toy to have fun with.
Yeah, just
and
a great
relax
overall
on.
toy.
So,
Yeah.
Excellent. Like he said before, if you're taking this thing cross country with someone on the back, please let us know in the comments how far you guys are going.
Let us know how many miles you have on yours.
Absolutely.
Or your 250 too.
Or your two. Yep. And then any questions you have about these? Any other motorcycles you would like reviews on, us to talk about, parts, maintenance, whatever. We got KTM's, Betas, Yamahas, Skidoo, off-road, snowmobiles. Any of this. So let us know. Like and subscribe.
Yeah.
Follow Powder Munchers on Instagram.
Yep.